Dear DC, sorry about the mess. My roommate had a D&D 3.5 game here the other night and Wait a minute. This is a letter. You can't see any of this. In 2011, DC announced a much-publicized reboot of their continuity, ostensibly to simplify years of backstory and retcons into a default position in order to lower the barrier to new readers who may not be able to jump into a story that depends on decades of other stories in order to fully appreciate. This is a problem the Big Two have been contending with for years, attempting to reduce the fear of new readers to enter into a world that they would be unfamiliar with. And it's a worthy goal, but it quickly became apparent that this reboot was only a sales gimmick, and the complex relationships between the 52 new books they would be releasing, the much written about New 52, was already so convoluted that it would be difficult to jump in without buying several of the rebooted titles. Since then, rather than try to alleviate that by writing strong standalone books with compelling characters, they've looked for more events and special treatments in an attempt to force people to buy multiple books each month to follow single stories, or by running crossovers that somehow manage to not touch many of the characters in their main books. Perhaps the most recent example is the Forever Evil storyline, which followed the Villains Month books, where villains would be featured instead of their heroic counterparts, which further followed the Trinity War crossover, which was the result of... you get the idea. Did I forget to mention Gothtopia, and the absurdly named Year Zero, The Culling, Death of the Family, Night of the Owls, Wrath of the First Lantern, Lights Out? I could keep going. And now DC has just announced a new set of weekly published books based on Alan Moore's Twilight of the Heroes pitch called Future's End, which will be set in a possible future 5 years ahead of the current one. Why does DC have an obsession with 5 years? Anyway, Moore stressed that it would only be a possible future with plenty of room to change anything over the course of the next 5 years comic time, and DC excels at shoving unconscionable amounts of story into 5-year time gaps, and will feature the death of many superheroes. Already the solicit for Green Arrow Future's End #1 starts with the death of Green Arrow and the rise of his replacement. This makes me think two things immediately. First, why do comic publishers seem to think that the death of heroes is something comic readers want to read? Ignoring the fairly common perception that death in a comic is only permanent if your last name happens to be Stacy, what does this prove? How does this serve the story? Sure, you can add in replacements, but it's also fairly common knowledge that comic fans are pretty resistant to change in their stories, so why bother doing this? It's not particularly surprising that something like this would come from Alan Moore, who's vocal about his hatred for the modern superhero comic, feeling that they're not fun anymore, something I agree with to an extent, and are aimed at adults rather than children, though his approach to this often seems to be to make comics that are over-the-top violent and dark and gritty in order to... something. But with that in mind, why would DC then go ahead with a project based on yet another attempt to combat the darkening of comics by making them even darker? The second thing that this brings to mind is, enough with the damn specials! Since the introduction of the New 52 and the clear boost in sales that they got through the gimmick, they've been trying to repeat that gimmick over and over by announcing special new things and selling the hell out of those. Looking at their sales figure, I can see why they're doing it too. Batman aside, their main books aren't cracking the sales top 10 pretty consistently, but their events and tie-ins are. That being said, I don't think it's due to writing quality so much as novelty. The thing is, the events are highly promoted, a lot of attention is built up around them, then they hit the shelves for a month, maybe a few months, at which point they disappear. Often the mystery of the plot is kept in the dark until the second to last or last issue of them, and bits and pieces are scattered throughout tie-ins that you either have to read them all, have to sit through pages of exposition, or just have to deal with being confused. This is often for the best, since the resolutions tend to end up falling flat. By the time they do, readers have already primed for the next super-duper special comic to come out. And honestly, most of their standard standalone books aren't that bad. They aren't great by any stretch of the imagination, but I for one remain a regular reader of Aquaman and Flash, despite a few tedious plots or blatant lies on the covers. Seriously, the only thing that's honest about this cover is that Flash is in at least half the book, though Deadman gets a whole lot of ink too. I'm even going to give the new Teen Titans another shot after the gruesome Lobdell run is over and a new writer can try and make these characters something resembling heroic again. My point is that there is potential in the regular stories, but instead of focusing on those, they're spreading their staff too thin, doing crossover after event after special after what if. And what's worse is that these don't even universally affect the DCU, such as how Nightwing was both captured by the crime syndicate, off-screen no less, then publicly unmasked in Forever Evil and is running around the streets of Chicago in his regular book, creating a disjointed mess. Meanwhile, they keep canceling books and bringing the replacements more in line with what's working, doing things like ending the brilliant Animal Man to give us yet another Justice League, this one in Canada, because 4 other Justice Leagues just weren't enough. Some people may consider it unfair to point out the overwhelming number of Justice Leagues, especially since Marvel likes to brand everything with Avengers or X something these days. But it's not just about the name. Of the 4 current Justice Leagues, 3 of them are basically the same with a different power arrangement. Only Justice League Dark is unique in any way. And it looks like Justice League United will be basically the same thing as the majority. Yes, Mighty Avengers and Avengers Underground both have Avengers in them, but they are very, very different stories with complex characters and entirely different team dynamics. Luke Cage's ragtag team of street-level protectors is nothing like the angry murder world survivors trying to hunt down the man who ruined their lives. That's not the case with the parade of Justice Leagues. DC, please, I'm begging you, just try to put some effort into your core books. Stop trying to dazzle us with spectacle and give us some substance. Stop teasing us with half-truths and adjective-heavy press releases and just write some good books that stand on their own for a little bit. Hell, give more attention and effort toward Christos Gage's Justice League Beyond 2.0 books, which are excellently written and drawn, especially for a weekly. We get it. It's a shared universe. I love that about comics, but you can't even be consistent about that. Moreover, that universe is only interesting if it's filled with characters we care about doing different and interesting things. Give us some time to get to know these characters as people that are not dealing with a crisis or reacting to something else. Stop throwing huge things at our heads and let us learn to care about these people. Let your writers have some room to just write their books and get back to basics. If you were running a restaurant and only surviving based on one dish and admission to a nightly fireworks show, maybe you shouldn't be running a restaurant. Similarly, if you roll from one major event to another and only sell Batman books, maybe you should consider whether the rest of the DCU is really a priority for you anymore. Sequentially yours, Karu.
As long as I can remember, I haven't looked for you. I haven't looked for you all my days. As long as I can remember, I haven't looked for you. And all this while you were waiting along the way. So let this be a testimony of how far I would go to bring you home. And let each day be our victory and the sweetest time that we've ever known. Quédate, por favor, por favor, quédate conmigo. Останься, пожалуйста, пожалуйста, останься со мной.